From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How today, Joelle?
I'm okay. We're a little bit frantic around here lately, aren't we?
Yeah. You're doing a super secret project at the moment.
I am. Yeah, so that's taking up quite a bit of time, and then there's just bunches of other stuff going on as well. So yeah,
it's never a dull day in the PDX office.
No, there never was, but
for other reasons. So.
Less time for hijinks now.
I don't know. There's always time for hijinks.
Yeah, there is. But
did you see the improvements we made to the basketball ring?
Well, yes, I did. I saw them as soon as I walked in.
Yeah.
And my very coherent statement was, "What that?"
Yeah.
So yeah, very articulate.
For the listeners who aren't aware, there's a lot of competition.
Lots. I don't engage in any of it. Just FYI.
I was going to say that.
I abstain.
So everyone else
all
is
the office competition.
Very much into sports ball. Joelle, not so much, or at all. She's the opposite.
Yeah. Josh isn't really into the sports ball either.
Yeah, but he plays tennis.
He plays tennis. Yeah.
Yeah, but he doesn't engage in the basketball shooting competition that we have.
No.
Yeah.
It is just listeners. It is a mini hoop and a softball. So
yeah,
we're okay.
Yeah, but I finally scored some points. Got on the board yesterday.
Oh, you did.
Yeah, I was
finally.
happy with that.
I was wondering how many times you guys were going to officially restart the official start date.
Yeah, well, until I scored some points, I guess. Yeah, if they got too far ahead, I'd have to restart it.
Mm.
Yeah, but look, hey, it's all fun. Fun and games.
Sure.
Fun and games. What you get, except Joelle misses out because she's a Grinch. Anyway, I'd like to introduce our guest for today. She's a returning guest and has appeared on several of our podcasts and panel events. She's an advocate for employers in the design, implementation, and operation of Australia's national and state legislative frameworks governing WHS and workers' compensation, health policy, and emergency management. Should have taken more of a breath before trying to get through all that.
Yeah.
She represents employers on national committees, including Safe Work Australia and the Mentally Healthy Workplace Alliance. She is the Director of Health, Safety, Resilience, and now Digital Policy at the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. A warm welcome back to the podcast, Jennifer Lowe.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Joelle. Good to be back.
You are possibly the busiest woman I know. How do you do it?
Well, I must say now I am starting to realise that I am possibly taking on a bit more than I can chew through. So I booked a holiday and we'll see what happens after that.
Yeah, so going to Tassie, you were explaining before. So what's that for?
Just because this year wasn't meant to be a holiday year financially. We tend to do it every second year. So I thought, given it's local, it doesn't really count.
Nice.
You're going over some water to get to Tassie, so it's almost international.
Almost.
Just like going to Rottnest.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. No quokkas.
No. Nobody gets quokkas except us.
Yeah.
So Jen, what podcast are you listening to lately?
Well, I have started a new one, the Financial Review. Bit dry.
It sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
How do I sign up to that one?
Oh boy.
Damn. It's got to come up with a really riveting, interesting one no one had said before. But
well, no one said that
before.
No, it's good. It gives, brief snapshots into trending issues. And I'm trying to learn all about AI and chat GBT. So it's very good for that.
Mm. Our CTO has a podcast around the machine learning and stuff that we might be able to suggest to Jen.
What that he does? He was
listening to.
Oh,
not that he's on, that he was listening to.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, fair enough. Good. Good to use those resources to help you learn about a new area of work.
Yeah, I found out our tech team's just invested in ChatGPT 4, so the paid version. So I'm interested to get in and check it out.
and ask it nonsense questions and see what it comes up with.
Yeah, that's what you use ChatGPT for, isn't
Absolutely.
it? Yeah.
Absolutely. What else is it good for?
Apparently,
It can't
birthday
count. It can't count.
No.
No, we
Can't
established
count.
that.
No, but it's good for drafting birthday cards, condolences. Apparently, that is one of the ways a lot of people are using it.
Condolences.
Mm.
Interesting.
Hmm.
I will test it out on condolences. So what have you, just to let you know as well, your last episode, episode 101, is now number 3 of our most listened. So well done.
Excellent. Let's try and get to number 1.
Yeah, well, you got to take out some pretty tough
You got to
contenders
take
there.
out Burrows.
You got to take out
plus
Burrows
us.
and us.
Yeah.
So good luck.
I'll settle for 3. It's pretty good.
Yeah, three's good.
3 is good. So other than rising up the ranks of our most listened episodes, what have you been up to since then?
Well, a new federal government has kept me quite busy. So with the change to the Albanese government, it's just been all of the usual trying to figure out departments, ministerial portfolios, who's who in the zoo, anticipating what policies they're going to cover. So very much that side. Probably the only other big projects that I'm excited about has been the Mentally Healthy Workplace Alliance. They finally launched the beta version of the platform, the National Workplace Initiative, and we've got a new National Work Health Safety Strategy. So a couple of big things.
Yeah, well, those are very big things. So it's good to be excited about.
Yeah. And all I've done is make myself a coffee this morning. Oh, and deliver.
Well, I don't think that Jen did all that just this morning.
Yeah.
Maybe longer.
Yeah.
I'd hope I would have done more than that as well in a year, but we'll stick to the highlights.
I'm sure that you have.
Yeah. She's just such an overachiever. And speaking of overachieving, your role has actually increased, right? Your portfolio. So it is Director of Health, Safety, Resilience and Digital Policy. So what does that role entail for the Australian Chamber?
So really it came off the back of the Optus Medibank scandals, all the interest in cybersecurity. I had already covered to an extent resilience, so emergency management, natural disasters. Cybersecurity does tend to sometimes come under the resilience banner. So they thought, that's a good fit. And, I wanted a new challenge at the time. I thought, COVID's settling down, but I've been involved in all these new areas, supply chains, treasury, all sorts of policy topics I haven't necessarily done before. So I thought, why not? Data, digi, cyber, at least no one quite knows where the regulation's sitting. So I'll be learning with everyone else in that respect. So it was a good opportunity.
Yeah, you're definitely future-proofing yourself going down the digital route. But interestingly, we had a networking event with Andrew Barrett presenting just recently, and unfortunately you couldn't come because it was budget night. But I was speaking to someone who also works as a health and safety professional and has been given digital under their portfolio as well. And I guess from my own understanding, it does make some sense. I mean, we have ISO 27001 that we're certified to. It is a management system specifically for information security. And, that's where I saw the relevance and value of ISO 45003, understanding, well, this is actually something that fundamentally changes the way you operate as a business and protects against nasties, right? So, it's about risk management, continuous improvement, right? So, any risk or health and safety professional should be geared towards it. But obviously there are a bit of a learning curve, like you say, with learning about some of the technologies and what are some of the standard hazards or controls or, issues associated with that kind of area.
Yeah, I think it's a natural transition, as you say, risk, safety, risk management more broadly. And certainly, one would hope we're dealing with a lot of data as safety professionals, looking at the evidence base. So there are a lot of synergies there. And AI is, robotics, that's an emerging space in health and safety. So yeah, really interesting.
So Cameron Stevens was on our podcast just recently, maybe an episode or two before this one airs. Have you caught up with him yet? Because he seems to be the local, and in fact he is local Perth, tech guru, safety tech guru.
No, I think I did try and reach out and we couldn't land a time. And then life took over and there was some hectic period, but you've just reminded me. I will write it down and reach out again.
Yeah, definitely worthwhile. You'll be able to cover a lot of ground in a very short period of time with Cam.
Yeah, he's doing some interesting stuff for sure. So last time you were with your number 3 rated episode, talking about the new model psychosocial regs. So maybe can we have an update of what's happened since then? Which of the jurisdictions have adopted them? What do we know about what to expect next?
Yeah, so with the regs, as anyone who works in policy would well appreciate, things move very slowly. So although I guess I'd hoped, and I know a lot of others would have hoped, that given the model regs were published, it would be a fairly straightforward, quick process for the jurisdictions to adopt it. That hasn't been the case. We've still got 3 jurisdictions who are yet to adopt the regs in whichever form. So ACT, SA and Victoria are still to adopt the regulations. And then we've also got 4 jurisdictions who are yet to look at adopting a code or having some sort of psychosocial code because they tend to be paired together. So I think last time when I was talking to you about the regs, one of the big deviation points, I guess we could call it, was the hierarchy of control. So I am definitely going to cover that in more detail during this talk because it's just coming up all over the place. But in terms of that, the model regs, just to recap, deliberately excluded the hierarchy of control. So it refers to part 3.1, which normally would include Reg 36, which is hierarchy of control, but they deliberately exclude it. Some of the jurisdictions, so Queensland, ACT and the Commonwealth, have moved to reincorporate it. So their regulations actually bring in the hierarchy of control again. And so that's led to flow-on effects with their codes of practice. So they've had to then explain, how do you use the hierarchy of control in this context, because the model code and the model regs don't talk to it. So there's been a little bit of a deviation, slow going, but definitely by the end of the year, we should have all jurisdictions with regulations and code.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one because really, regardless of whether the requirement to use the hierarchy is there or not, the goal is for organisations to engage in work redesign, right? And that's an elimination or a substitution control. So even in absence of that requirement for using a hierarchy of controls, that's still sort of the approach that is that actually explicitly outlined in the code of practice? I think it is, isn't it? That should be the approach taken.
So yeah, so they always talk generally to you should eliminate first, and then if not reasonably practicable, minimise. Some of them explicitly start to refer to use the highest controls, sometimes referring to the hierarchy specifically. But what is really interesting and why I guess I wanted to talk about work design today, and I'm glad you brought it up, is because work design's kind of snuck under the radar, and a lot of the jurisdictions and the debates have been so focused on the hierarchy as a way to explain it, that whole design concept, systems of work concept's been completely overlooked. And we're actually finding that that's where a lot of the feedback from employers is, where they're saying, please explain how this concept of design of work fits in. It's mentioned here and there, but no one goes into any detail. And then you've got the hierarchy that doesn't mention work design. So what's going on? Please explain.
Yeah, and so the Queensland Code of Practice does go into some detail around sort of the work design being equivalent to or the same as a substitution level control. So I think that's probably like for me, that's been helpful when I've been talking to people in health and safety functions to say, well, this is sort of the equivalent, and then they're more accepting of that as a control. But then it's more around explaining why that's not an admin control, because a lot of the time it looks like an admin control.
Exactly. Yeah. And now broadly, I guess we're trying to reset and say, before you even get to the hierarchy or that, debate about where it sits, we tend to bypass eliminate, because the hierarchy is when you're looking at minimizing risks. But for work design, it is the best way to eliminate risks in psychosocial space. So that's something that, again, I'm trying to really bring back to the attention of, practitioners, employers, is you can't bypass the eliminate stage, because work design or redesign is a prime opportunity to be able to eliminate. And then, as you start to go into the minimize, I think some of the other codes are actually using the more, traditional, the SWA version of the hierarchy, where you have substitute, isolate, engineering on the same level. So in that respect, work design, you could consider, tackles all three, substitute primarily, but then it can come in for isolate and engineering. So it's really trying to talk people through, don't get caught up on, using the hierarchy or work design, but be reassured, if you are in a jurisdiction that's stipulated you must use the hierarchy, that there is that recognition that if you're doing good work design, redesign, you'll still be compliant. Because that was another big fear that employers were having. They were going, if we get these human factors, ergo people, for instance, in, and they're talking about redesign and work design, are we still going to be compliant when it's talking about the hierarchy? And there wasn't that connecting the dots. So it was that's probably been a very confusing aspect of the new regs for people.
Yeah, and it's good that that's being unpacked now, I guess. And then there's things like the body of knowledge on work design as well, a book of knowledge, sorry. Yep. But how, I guess, broadly are businesses responding beyond the confusion around the hierarchy of controls? How are they responding to new regulations and codes and the different approaches in the different states?
So I guess it depends what size business you are, what industry you're in, and what jurisdiction you're in. So we're seeing very, very different responses.
You sound just like Joelle.
You do. It depends. That's my answer to everything.
Yeah, we always qualify.
so give us some, I guess, idea of, I guess across the different kind of sizes and industries.
So big end of town, as you would expect, had already probably been tackling this pretty well, have consultants or in-house expertise. They had most likely been looking at ISO 45003 and getting a good steer from that. Then, cross-checking against the code. And then when the regs came in, it was more a matter of double-checking, what we're currently doing, is that sufficient, or is there anything that we have to address specifically just to make sure that we are being compliant with expectations. When you start to get into the SME side, small business owners still don't know what psychosocial means. So very, very different for them. We did a survey last year where we looked at understanding of psychosocial. We asked questions around, the term versus things like, do you have specific systems for bullying or harassment? And we started to pick out different psychosocial hazards and testing, awareness of that. They're pretty good on the more obvious physical ones like bullying, aggression, violence, or work environment equipment. Because they've been done for a while now. We're building up a good maturity across the board in terms of addressing physical hazards and risks, although still a long way to go. But yeah, certainly the terminology is so new. The availability of guidance that was digestible was not there. So a lot of SMEs have just been, going, yeah, we're doing something on mental health and thinking that's sufficient around psychosocial, or they're trying to pull, a checklist or something that says psychosocial on it and not necessarily understanding, what it is, what it looks like. Probably the biggest one, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, is people jump straight to the list of hazards.
Yeah, and we're seeing some wellbeing vendors out there actually giving some very bad information to organizations. So saying things like, wellbeing champions are a way to address your requirements under the regulations, or, psychological safety, as in the Amy Edmondson variety. Like if you just foster psychological safety, you're meeting your requirements under the regulations. So unfortunately, there's some bad advice going around as well by probably ill-informed vendors in this space as well.
Yeah, and that would probably be where I would like to change the mindset. So and even the code, so reflecting back now, and time is moving very quickly. But obviously the model code was written a couple of years ago now, and you can see a pretty big difference when you compare that code to the more recent ones like Queensland or, the ACT draft, if people have seen it. New South Wales is also getting a little old in thinking. So our understanding and the way that we're tackling it, particularly from a regulator perspective, is evolving very quickly. But for those who jumped on it in the initial, wave and promotion, and who might not have checked back in, it is very much like, here are the hazards, off you go, look at them one by one, do a plan for each one individually, and then you're good to go. And so this is why I'm on such a big crusade about work design, because when you realize that they're starting from that point of view, work design, systems of work is never going to come up. It's not going to be a part of their thinking or management of risk. So it's really trying to revert back and go, that was the initial stages, very, very simplified, easing people into it. And now we have to take a step back and look at, the whole system, the regs in its entirety, and then start to piece it together.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode. Yeah, and that's, a learning curve for both the regulators, I guess, as well as the companies that have to adopt the regulations.
Yeah, definitely a learning that hopefully Safe with Australia will take forward in terms of these emerging areas. So we have a few, green economies coming up, gig economies still there. So as we're developing regulation or policy for these emerging areas, we're going to have to be more aware that it's moving so quickly, and we need to be responsive and really think about how we want to introduce these new concepts to workplaces to make sure we're not going to embed an oversimplified version early on and then not be able to shift that thinking and bring them along on the journey.
So let's get into work design a bit more then, since that's it's kind of almost the most critical element of how an organisation would go about implementing useful controls for psychosocial hazards. But as you say, it's an area that is I guess a source of confusion for most organizations out there.
Mm.
So maybe can you explain what work design means, and sort of in the context of psychosocial hazards in particular?
Yep. So it's not a new concept. So anyone, particularly in human factors, ergonomics, psych fields, will be very familiar with it, or even, in general safety by design has been around for quite a while now. When we start to look at it more from a psychosocial perspective, you've got, again, probably 3 layers. So you're looking at the academic layer, the body of knowledge type, what's the research, the models, so the resources, demands, models, all those theoretical, research papers that have come through since the 1970s, if not earlier. And then you've got the regulator perspective, and what's in the regs and the codes. So in terms of that, I just thought I'd bring up Sharon Parker's definition as, one of those authors to actually try to put a definition down on what work design is. So the content and organisation of one's work tasks, activities, relationships, and responsibilities within a job or role. And then when you look at the regs, they're really talking about it in terms of the design of work, including job demands and tasks, and the design, layout, and environmental conditions of the workplace. And then they talk to relationships, plant structures, etc. So there is similarity there, but certainly it will be different if you're approaching it from an academic perspective versus coming to it fresh and looking at the regs and code.
Yeah. So also, I think it sounds like there's a fairly significant difference there, where Parker's definition seems to be really focusing at the individual level of analysis, whereas the regs are looking at it more from a global or group level.
Yeah, and we, best practice would be look at it from both and really all 3. So organisational level, team level, individual level. I know the regulators want to typically steer you away from individual level, but we know there are really useful tools when you look at specific job task analysis, or, specific cognitive demands of tasks that can really highlight for you different work design issues and help you identify problems. So I'd be saying, we really need to look at it from all 3 levels, and we've got tools readily available to look at it from all 3 levels.
Yeah, I guess it's the when we think about individual level approaches, we tend to think about responding and reacting. Yeah, once somebody's already unwell, what do we do around that? Or how do we upskill them or train them to manage the hazards that we are exposing them to better? Whereas if we're actually talking about that individual level preventative controls, it is, as you say, around actually doing some job analysis, understanding what are the demands of this role, and exploring sort of where are the boundaries of this role. Is there overlap or conflict with other positions and that sort of thing? So you are, I guess, you're looking at the individual, but you're also looking at them as part of that network. And that type of job analysis can then also be broadened across a group as well. So it's not necessarily just limited to the individual, but to sort of everybody who's performing that role. So it does, cover, I think, both the individual and the group level in that sense.
Yeah, and one of the ways I like to approach it is to clearly explain you can use work design, redesign to both identify and control risk, because most people jump to control, and really when you look at the codes, it is mentioned just in that kind of controlling risk area, but it's really good as an identification tool, and certainly the work design principles is trying to shift to that systems thinking. So really looking at the interaction of everything, the person with the environment, the tasks, how the organisation as a whole works, how the individual fits into that web of activity. So if you're looking at it from an identifier point of view, or, a preventative versus a reactive, I guess. Yeah, it doesn't really matter which way you look at it, but say we're looking at it from that perspective. When workplaces are looking at creating a new role, that's a perfect opportunity to focus straight in on that specific role, the job tasks, and properly design it from day one. And that's where it's a really good example of eliminating the risk before it's even present.
Hey, Jen, I'm interested in your thoughts. Is increasing remuneration a sufficient hazard control? Because the reason I bring it up is I was having a conversation with someone from a school yesterday, and they said, "Oh, look, there's what if we've got someone who, and this is an actual case where they've got someone who has been delivering curriculum as a teacher. They've taken on now additional leadership responsibilities, so they've got a pay increase to, recognise that, but they still have to deliver curriculum, so it's additional responsibilities, additional workload, and they've also got professional development activities that they're doing on top of that. So they're having to come in at 6 a.m., to do that before school starts. And the way they're countering that is going, well, you're getting paid more, so you can put up with more. So is that a sufficient way to design work to prevent harm?
No. So yeah, this is a common mistake we see. And again, I think it stems down to they're looking at the hazards in isolation, or they're going, oh yeah, reward and recognition. That's, tick. We've addressed that problem. Psychosocial hazards very, very rarely, if ever, operate in isolation. So you'll always have, 2 or 3 different hazards working against each other to result in a situation. So in that case, as you said, it's the hours, it's the workload, it's the reward and recognition, all of these things. So by just looking at remuneration, you're not necessarily going to hit the other issues. So yeah, and that it is a common problem.
Yeah, and that's it, right? So working 60 to 80 hours a week for most people is unsustainable. Not everyone can be a superhero like Jen Lowe. Not everyone wears capes. Not all superheroes wear capes.
My answer to that question, Jason, would be it depends.
Yeah.
Because like if you are, for example, working, I guess, or the work that you're doing versus the pay that you're getting equivalent to or in comparison to other people in your organization, if there's a disparity there, then that is an organizational justice issue. And so in that case, if you're increasing somebody's salary so that they're then at parity with, I guess, other people who are doing equivalent levels of work in the organization, then that would actually be a risk mitigation or a hazard reduction strategy, because then you're taking away that sense of injustice.
Yeah.
So it's not a way to address workload.
Yeah.
But from other in relation to other hazards, it could be a reasonable control.
Yeah. So what I was considering there is, like you say, there is an improvement potentially in organizational justice. Obviously, reward is increased. But yeah, like working hours significantly are increasing.
Yeah. So you can't danger pay your way out of hazards. Yeah.
But we do see that, right? Same in banking, and the unions are obviously going to town on some banks at the moment regarding what are reasonable additional working hours. 80 hours a week probably is not,
Well, finance law was the other one that was a couple of years ago now. I think that one first sort of started being scrutinised and found that graduate lawyers were actually earning under the minimum wage when it was looking at the actual hours that they were working. So yeah, that's in terms of working hours and workload, it's definitely not just a increase people's pay and they can cope with it.
Yeah, for Jen's benefit, we won't ask her to comment on some of these things.
I might divert back to workloads, because that is the biggest one that's often underlooked, I think, because the organisations tend to go, oh, well, we can't hire more people, we have the work that we do, and everyone's just going to have to cope, or we'll figure it out. And then that's it. That's the end of the discussion. So with psychosocial hazards, and particularly work design, it is a really good tool to address work demands, low or high. It's something that is so often overlooked, and it could, result in all sorts of improvements that don't equal, more people. So I'd say that's one of, again, the areas that we want to try and push out, to say where there are issues with work demands, that's a great opportunity to start to look at, the job task. Let's go through, what are you actually doing? So there is also that, what are you meant to be doing on paper versus what are you actually doing? And often even that conversation alone, where the manager's, checking in to say, tell me what you're actually doing in a day, in a week, can identify a whole range of issues, because what the work is in practice might look completely different to how it is described. And then we get into things like role clarity, ambiguity, and you can start to identify other problems. So
yeah, and in that that task analysis or job analysis, there's also the opportunity there to say, well, what are the things that you're doing that don't necessarily need to be done by your role? Can we take those tasks away from you and allocate them to somebody else? Or is it sort of redundant work that multiple people are kind of, everybody's attending this meeting, that not everybody actually needs to be at the meeting? Maybe they just need to get the decisions arising out of the meeting, or those types of things. So there's definite opportunity to identify, I guess, what we could call bloatware, if we wanted to use a digital analogy. So yeah, all of that maybe unnecessary bureaucracy that's clogging up people's capacity from what it is that they're actually there to perform.
And, practically that's something we've been doing internally, right, lately in the last couple of weeks. So I got Joelle we're thinking about workload allocation. Obviously, we're getting a lot more client work these days in light of the regulations. And we, want to make sure that we actually have capacity to deliver and make sure we're not overloading our important staff and valuable staff. So, Joelle went through and go, well, this is what a typical week looks like for me. And through that process, we're able to go, well, actually, you know what? I reckon we can get someone else to do that bit, or that's actually not important. So you can probably take that out of your requirements. We did eliminate some people having to attend meetings that just weren't, necessary for them. And it was just, extra time spent that they didn't need to. So, and then, doing things like going, well, let's forward project, where people are going to having to be doing client work. And let's make sure, because we know that there's stuff that comes in last minute, that we don't overload people to 70% capacity in planned work. So we've got that extra 30% of additional capacity as required. We've been doing some, interesting things, practicing what we preach lately, putting in controls to address some of these things that we know are significant hazards.
Yes.
Yeah. It's an example of, it doesn't need to be complicated. And I think the problem is, we say, job task hazard analysis, and people go, oh, wow, that's scary. That must be a very complicated process. But it's not. It's really what you've just described, sitting down, having a conversation, working through, and really every manager worker should be able to have those conversations quite easily. So it's not something to be scared of. And I think that's the real perception issue we're coming up against in space.
Yeah, much easier to or beneficial for everyone, I think, to rip the Band-Aid off, if you like, and have a look at what's underneath, rather than putting your hands over your eyes and going, well, I don't know what's going on, and I don't want to ask the question because I'm scared to know the answer. Yeah. So, the regulators are obviously doing a lot in every state in this space. What resources have you seen that are available that's worthwhile for people to look out for?
So in terms of work design, systems of work, there isn't actually too much. So it's something that I know I've been looking at and wanting to create more user-friendly resources for employers. There is, as we talked about, the body of knowledge. So that chapter is really good, but it is a very academic heavy type perspective. So not something a small business owner can pick up and readily understand, but it is good for, practitioners or professionals who want to read more about work design. Then you've got the people at work stuff, which again, there's all sorts of different tools out there. Comcare has been doing a little bit around work design, but very much trying to introduce the concept. So really early days there in trying to just break down, what is work design? How can we use it to address work demands? Those kind of things. So they'll likely be coming out with more and more materials to start to build that up. But it is an area that I'm trying to work collaboratively with the regulators on, because I think there is a real danger that they could go off in all different directions. So, like the hierarchy, if people try and articulate the hierarchy in more detail, we start to get massive differences in how it's explained, what constitutes an engineering control for someone might be, isolation control for someone else. So there's all sorts of issues there. I see that we could have that same problem with work design, even trying to settle on a definition across the board. So it is an area that, even though there's not much out there yet, I'm hopeful that behind the scenes, talking to a couple of the regulators, that we'll be able to get some fairly consistent guidance out there shortly.
Yeah, and that's important, particularly with those PCBUs that are operating across different jurisdictions, right? I know a lot of them are worried about having to have significant differences in how they operate in Victoria versus in other states. It just increases the complexity of compliance.
Yeah, in a nutshell, though, I'd say you can't really go wrong if you're starting with that systems thinking work design. And then going, how can we use that and through the life cycle of work or projects, and, how can we eliminate risk? And then it doesn't really matter if you stick to design or start to deviate to hierarchy of control. At least, you're going to cover most bases that way, because you're using a framework. And that's what these things are. They're, a methodology, a framework to make sure you're going through the possibilities, and there's some way for you to make sure you're looking at all the controls, which one's going to be better, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's definitely the I guess advice we've been giving to companies attending webinars that we've been running. Like, these are your high level workplace health and safety requirements to do with psychosocial hazards. There will be like nuances, but if you stick to these things, like you say, you're 99% of the way there.
Yeah, just don't go well-being, yoga, EAP. Stay away.
Yeah, please do. Anything else to add, Joelle?
I'm good, Jason.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, that brings us close to the end of the discussion. Now, we asked the same question of all of our guests towards this point of the podcast. I can't remember how you answered it last time. But if you were to think into the future for your hopes around what workplace mental health might look like, what are your hopes for the future, Jen?
I'd probably say that there's a better general understanding, and that every person, whether they're a manager or a worker, has some sort of go-to. So if a conversation arises about anxiety versus a conversation about stress or work demands, that people will be able to be consciously recognizing that there's something here that they might need to deal with, and have some sort of awareness about where to go for that first step to help, or how to report it, how to look into it, that kind of thing. So I don't think we're there yet. I think there's still a lot of people who are oblivious to it being a work-related issue, and just think of it as a personal problem still, or don't want to get involved. So I think that would be a really good step for us if we can get to that stage.
Yeah. So, if we get you on in the next year, hopefully we're, closer towards that goal. But I think that's attainable.
Yeah. So any parting words of advice for listeners, Jen, maybe around the work design topic that we've been talking about?
Read as much as you can. So I definitely recommend any safety practitioner should familiarize themselves with safety by design principles, work design, and try to think how they can better apply that to their everyday work. Because design's just fallen by the wayside, and it does surprise me how very few times, I guess, it's ever mentioned by safety and health practitioners at present. So,
Yeah, no, we do get, obviously a lot of people, they get caught up in the individual level interventions rather than thinking systems, Yeah,
and that's just that anchoring that's come through the public health model. So we are working to overcome that.
Yes, one episode at a time. Well, Jen, always amazing having you on the podcast. This will hopefully get to number 4 on the all-time downloads
Absolutely.
soon enough. I think it's been, again, very valuable discussion with you. And I think how you articulate things so clearly is amazing. And I think all the regulators and all the other bodies that you contribute to are the better for having you contribute. So thanks again for joining us on the podcast and sharing.
No, thank you. Always a pleasure to chat.
Awesome. All right, listeners, that brings us to the end of this episode. So remember, we do video these things when we have our conversations with our guests, and you can check out all those videos as well as short clips on the Flourish TX YouTube page. Speaking of short clips, we also put them on the Flourish TX LinkedIn page weekly, so do check them out. And while you're over on LinkedIn, you'll be able to connect with Joelle and myself if you want to continue the conversation over there. And Jen, I see on LinkedIn from time to time, promoting some of the important work that she's doing. So feel free to reach out to her as well. So thanks again, listeners. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.